Welcome to the Small Business Made Simple podcast, brought to you by socialmediaandmarketing.com.au. Being in business is never easy, but it can be simple, or at least simpler. Join me, your host Jen Donovan, every week where we focus on marketing, social media, and working towards simplifying your business. You with me? Let's do this.
Gonna dream it big, 'cause someone out there listening. Everyone's got a voice to give, and it's time I heard you whistling, 'cause there's no point at all, in dreaming small,
Way, hey there. Welcome to episode 196 of the Small Business Made Simple podcast. Thank you, as always, for lending me your ears today. I know there are lots of choices out there, and I really do appreciate you making my podcast one of them. If you are enjoying this podcast, though, I would love you to take a screenshot and share it on your socials, and maybe even tag me at Jen Donovan, because that would be so cool. This is very much a one-way conversation, so I would love to get to know you a little bit better by tagging me, and then I can follow you and have a conversation with you online. Of course, the show notes for this particular episode, which is episode 196, you can find at socialmediaandmarketing.com.au/196. Before I get started on today's episode, how did you go with last week's episode? We chatted to Troy Brown from Expert about financials and making decisions based on not only real data, but accurate data. And of course, he told us a little bit about his software that he has, Expert, that can help you in your small business. So let me know, did you Google Expert? Did you look up Troy? Did you use the link in the show notes? Did you get curious at all about your finances and what might not quite be right with your finances despite your absolute best efforts? Drop me a post or tag me inside my Like-Minded Business Owners Facebook group. I'd love to hear about what you thought of last week's episode and last week's interview with Troy. So on to today's episode, we are going to talk about how to pitch for a podcast, how to be a guest on a podcast. And really, pitching to go on someone's podcast is a lot like pitching for anything else, really. So the tips and tricks I'm giving you today, which are about how to pitch to be a guest on a podcast, really do go over several other avenues of whether you want to pitch yourself to basically get in front of somebody else's audience, such as maybe write a blog for someone or go on someone's TV show or someone's YouTube channel. It's all the same thing, but I will talk, I guess, about pitching to be a podcast guest, but the learnings are still the same whatever you're trying to pitch for. So I'm going to start with what not to do, because just like marketing isn't about you, and I'm really sorry if you thought it was about you, pitching isn't about you either. It always needs to be customer centric, and it's always about what you can do for their audience rather than what you're going to get out of it. When you're pitching, keep this front and center of your mind. It's got to be customer centric. It's about them. It's not about you. And when I say them, it's not even about the person you're pitching to. It's about their audience. So if you write a pitch, just like you write copy for your website, and it's full of I do this and I do that and I can and I can't, if it's full of too many I's, then it's not customer centric. It's actually about you and not about the customer. So just watch that when you're writing pitches as well. Remember, in marketing, how your ideal client doesn't care about you until they know that you can help them or solve their problem or delight them. Well, it's the same here. The podcast host doesn't care who you are or what you do or how long you've done it for until they know that you have value to give to their audience. Then they will most certainly care. And as a podcast host myself, clearly, because you're listening to this podcast, it takes an enormously huge, big amount of energy and effort to build an audience who will listen to your podcast week after week, episode after episode. You're basically building a fan base of people, a community of people, and that takes a lot of work. So the people you let in to their ears. So the people that I let into my listeners' ears, like my listeners are so treasured. My audience is really treasured. So who I let inside their ears will be vetted. It will be have to be a good fit for the podcast. And in my case, they will have to know what they're talking about and be potential experts in their field. So given all that, how do you pitch yourself? So here's some hints on how to pitch yourself. Make the pitch conversational. Take the time to listen to their podcast. Trust me, we get enough pitches to know when you are lying about listening to the podcast and you haven't really listened to any. And just because they have your audience doesn't mean you are a good fit for each other. So listen and make sure they align with your values as well. Make sure the podcast host aligns with your values, because this is going to say something about you as well as, having the opportunity to get in front of their audience. So make sure there is, a good sync there between your business values and their business values. And make sure you listen to the person's podcast. Don't say you did if you didn't. Just take some time to do it. Also take time to do your research. Follow and interact with the host on social media before pitching. When pitching, being able to pitch as a listener or a fan of their socials will put you streets in front of others. The best pitch I can say that I have gotten came from a virtual assistant to a person who wanted to come on the podcast. And she talked about, I can't remember 100%, but it was something like she talked about my baby lambs or my daughter going off to university or something like that. It was something that really made me go, this person's actually been following me on social media and knows me a little bit. And it also made me curious enough to continue to read, because that's what it's all about. It's all about making the person you want to get in front of curious enough to keep reading your pitch. And that's all you need, some really relatable points, but authentic ones, of course, to ensure the person reading the pitch continues reading the pitch. My next little hint is about to tell the podcast owner or host what you'd like to talk about to their audience. Literally pitch them a pitch. Give them maybe a title and a list of 3 or 4 things under that title that you think their audience would get really great value from, and even pitch the outcome that the audience will get. But don't pitch something like how to do complicated mathematical sums. Oh, and by the way, I just happen to have a book with the same title as that. If you have a book, absolutely, you want to promote yourself as much as possible, but don't ram the book under the podcaster's nose, because now the podcast host thinks the only reason why you want to come on is to sell your book to their audience, as opposed to thinking that you genuinely want to help other people, or genuinely help the podcaster's audience. Absolutely, you get to pitch your book, and most podcasters will say to you, how can we best get in contact with you, or do you have any current offers, things like that. But that's not what you should be putting into the pitch. It doesn't come across as genuine as to why you want to come on the podcast. My next tip is to make your pitch short and sharp. People are way too busy to read an email with 17 paragraphs, 15 of which are telling the person how good you are and how long you've been that good for. Make it short and sharp. We are all super busy. If you are wanting to really up-level your pitch, make it a video. Pitch someone in a video, in like a 60-second, 30-second video as to why you should be, why they would like you to be on their podcast, and again, or on their YouTube channel, or in their TV station, or to write a blog for your audience, for their audience. It's just not about podcasting, but I'm just using podcasting as an example at the moment. And so moving on from there, in order to make a pitch or an email short and sharp, having a 1-pager can really help you. So this 1-pager is basically, as it says, it's just a 1 A4 page, and it has all your details on it. Perhaps a list of proposed topics and a few short paragraphs about you, and perhaps even other media highlights, like, I've also been featured on, and include some logos where you've also been featured. As much as the pitch isn't about you, the podcast host will still want to get to know you a little, and to make sure that you obviously qualify to talk about the amazing topic you are pitching. And this is where the one-pager can come in really handy, because it's like, I've pitched you a short, sharp email, and now here's a one-pager with some other information on it that, if you are interested in the pitch, then you can have a bit of a read here. If anyone is interested in what this might look like, give me an email or send me an email, jen@jendonovan.com.au, and I will send you a copy of my one-pager. Look, it's not perfect, but it will be a really great template for you to start with. Again, if you're wanting to pitch anything, that's a good idea. And maybe if you have a media kit as well. So a media kit is a little bit longer than a one-pager, but it's a handy little piece of marketing to have in your marketing kit. So again, if you would like a copy of my media kit, just to have a bit of a look at and get a bit of an idea of what yours should look like, send me an email. More than happy to share those little pieces with you. So the one-pager and the media kit with you. You got to know where to start, right? So why not have a look at somebody else's and get an idea of where to start? All right, a couple more things when you are pitching for a podcast. Make your pitch unique and know who you are pitching to. No use pitching as a YouTube expert to a podcast that's just had 2 YouTube experts on the podcast in the last few months. This comes back to actually listening to the podcast you are trying to pitch and having a bit of a scroll and doing a bit of research on this podcast. Because unless your pitch is super different, they probably will say no based on that alone. The fact that, you're saying you're a YouTube expert and they're like, oh, but I've already had a couple of YouTube experts on. Again, if you are into finance, but they've already had some accountants on, unless your pitch is unique, then you're probably not going to get a positive answer based on this alone. So again, you might diarise it to say, right, I'm going to reach out to this podcast in 3 months' time because I can see that they've recently just had someone on who is very similar to me. Again, this is why it's important to listen to the person's podcast first. And don't pitch against the host is my next point. For instance, if your host is a lawyer who talks about wills and estates, so say they've got a podcast all about wills and estates, and you're a lawyer who talks about wills and estates, then you are going to have a seriously unique pitch, or, to get through, because they're like, well, that's what I talk about. So why would I share my audience with you when that's already what I'm an expert in? So you either need to have a seriously unique pitch to, I guess, get onto their podcast, or you might be better off pitching to lawyers who aren't in that space. So again, if you're not a lawyer, you can see what I mean here. Don't try and pitch against the host. This is their audience. They have spent an enormous amount of time, energy, possibly money, getting this audience, and they're not really going to just share it with you willy-nilly. So, again, do your research, listen to the podcast, and, reach out to those you think would be most suitable for the topic that you have in mind. I have lots of, on the other hand, I have lots of guests who talk about marketing on my podcast. If you've been a listener for any length of time, you know that I have other marketers on my podcast, but they're never my competition. They definitely complement what I do and what I teach and what I talk about, but I wouldn't consider them my competition. So again, you've got to make sure that you've got a really good pitch and you're not pitching against the host. This is their space and they will be very protective of their space. Above all, remember, it's got to be customer centric. It's not about you. And also remember that the podcasters, like me, and the huger ones than me, obviously, I get around 5 to 10 pitches a day. I'm sure that people who have enormous podcasts get probably hundreds of pitches through their emails every single day. And most of them are coming from people whose job it is to get people podcast interviews rather than the business owner themselves or the guests themselves. So I have to say that most of them fail miserably at their job. If their job is to get people onto podcasts, then I think personally they fail miserably at this for all the points that I've just already given. Like, obviously, coming up with this episode, I've gone back into my own experiences and gone back and had a look at pitches and what I didn't really like about pitches that I've been given and the ones that have got through, how I've gone, oh yes, that sounds super interesting. I will say though, I get a lot of Americans pitching for my podcast. I think I've only ever had 2 people that weren't Australians on my podcast. So shout out to Rachel in New Zealand and, of course, 1 American that I've had as well. So it's not really something I'm looking for, having Americans, but I think Americans pitching for podcasts is very different to what I would accept as an Australian, which is obviously a lot of the things that I've talked about today, like 15 paragraphs of telling me how good you are and how long you've been that good for, as opposed to coming up with what you would actually provide for my audience and the value that you would bring to the table. So after all this, you might be thinking, well, Jen, this is all super information, but why would I want to be on somebody else's podcast? You know, what's in it for me? If I have to go through all these hoops and jump all through these hoops, then what is in it for me at the end of the day? So the answer is clearly a lot. Setting yourself up as the expert in your field, getting in front of a new audience who doesn't know who you are or what you can do for them. Stepping outside your comfort zone is a really big one. Creating yourself some great repurposable content, and hey, amen for that, right? Having some great content that you can continue to repurpose, creating a new connection and extending your network through conversation, both with the podcast hosts and of course their audience as well, expanding your brand awareness, and developing your speaking skills is always a great thing to do. And although not the purpose or the reason, you can potentially make more sales as well. And there is a lot more reasons why pitching for someone's podcast or going onto someone's podcast, or like I said, TV or YouTube or writing a blog is a really great idea for your business and a great piece of strategy to have inside your marketing. As I mentioned at the start, if podcasts aren't your thing, and well, maybe they should be your thing after listening to this, these little pieces of advice, of course, are really great when you are wanting to pitch just about anywhere for any marketing or social media or business idea that you have. So I hope these have helped you. I hope that, if you've been thinking, I really like to pitch for something or someone's YouTube channel, or I've got this enormous I have enormous value to bring to the table, just not quite sure how to do these things, then hopefully this podcast has helped you. Remember, you can email me, jen@jendonovan.com.au, and I can send you a copy of my media kit and my one-pager, which again, just might give you a little bit of a nudge and help you out as far as getting this into your marketing strategy as well. So what do you think? Whose podcast would you like to get on? And I say that because there is a podcast just about for every subject matter. I almost guarantee it. There is a podcast, at least one, probably 20 million of them, to do with your niche, to do with your expertise, who would really love to hear from you. Just start doing some research and get pitching to help grow your brand, growing you, and of course, growing your business. And never underestimate what you know that other people would like to know. I'd love to continue this chat with you in my Like-Minded Business Owners Facebook group. If you aren't a member already, then shoot in there. I would love to see you in there. And I also have some really great guests coming up this year as well. There's some great lives already happen. You can go and have a look at that in the video section and watch those lives back. But I have some great guests coming up inside that group still, which is fantastic. Another reason to join my little community over there. But that's it for another episode of the Small Business Made Simple podcast. Next week we are doing episode 197. I really need to think about episode 200. It's getting so close. So if you have a suggestion, please reach out and let me know. But in the meantime, let's hang out on social and get social on social. You'll find me on Instagram, Facebook, and of course, LinkedIn. But whatever you do, remember, my small business peeps, as my opening song says, there is no point in dreaming small.
No time like the present. Tell it like you feel it, say it proud, be true, and let us see you for the star that you are. No point in dreaming small.
I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Yorta Yorta people, on which I record this podcast and conduct my business today, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend this respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today as well.